Dear viewers, dear panelists, honorable guests, good evening, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to MSC's inaugural panel discussion. My name is Alia Amir.
And I am Adnan Mahmutovic. MSC stands for Muslim Scientists Europe. It is a non-political, independent, and informal networking group based in Stockholm. It is a platform that seeks to feature scientists from manifold disciplines who identify as Muslim and European.
MSC was founded in 2019 as a reaction to several symptoms of our global times. First of all, we see how the notion of Muslimness is continuously being shaped by various ideologies and political movements. Often, it is made to imply backwardness, discrimination, irrationality, prejudice, etc., etc. The position of Muslims in the West is constantly questioned. The main implication is that Muslim and European identities are fundamentally incompatible. Second, under this constant pressure, this questioning of our legitimacy as citizens of Western countries, especially in Europe, we notice that many think that Muslims are lagging behind, especially when it comes to scientific progress. At the same time, we also note a rise in nostalgia for a time when Muslims were at the forefront of scientific and cultural development. We find countless references to great Muslim scientists like Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, al-Khwarizmi, and many others who have grounded modern mathematics, medicine, etc. Many refer to these past times as the golden age of Muslim science, a bygone era of unrepeatable accomplishments.
The problem we see is that this nostalgia gives us a very narrow image of any of the identities we want to interrogate today. It makes us think that there are no, or at least not enough, Muslims doing good science. So when we Google Muslim scientist, we should not be swamped by images of old bearded men with turbans. This is not an image we can identify with any longer. So MSC came into birth shaped by our own questions about who we are. Identity labels always both fit and do not fit us. They define and confine us. And most often we have no control over them. So MSC is a small but persistent effort to interrogate images and labels. Our aim is to showcase the beautiful diversity of Muslims doing science in our times in Europe. So every Friday, we feature an interview with a new guest on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter. So far, we have featured around 42 scientists from all kinds of disciplines, ethnic origins, age, and we have managed to have an even spread of genders. Tonight, we are extremely pleased to host this inaugural webinar with 5 brilliant minds, both veterans and new generations doing science today. They will share their view on these hot topics and help us navigate a bit better through this quagmire of our times. So with us, we have Idil Osman, Tariq Modood, Hani Abdul Qadir, Nirha Efendić, and Masoud Kamali. We will, just to give you some sense of what is going to transpire during the evening, more structurally. So we will ask each of the panelists to speak on these topics for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we're going to have a discussion. So our speakers are going to engage with each other, talking about these topics and discussing these topics, and then Alia and I will moderate and also collect questions from the audience. So we will keep an eye on the chat, on the Q&A, and so on. Our first speaker is Dr. Idil Osman. She is a media and communication academic, currently working at the University of Leicester, UK. Her research focuses on how media and communications relate to modern-day the conflicts, humanitarianism and development, foreign policy, and how they engage refugee, migrant, and diaspora communities. On top of this, Dr. Osman boasts a long career in journalism for BBC, Al Jazeera, African Arguments, ITV, Channel 4, and many more. Dr. Osman, Idil, if I may, it's an honor to have you with us. Please, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening to all of you. It's a real pleasure to be with you all in this inaugural seminar of MSE. I want to first congratulate the organizers of MSE, Alia, Adnan, and the organizers behind the scene that are not with us tonight, but I'm sure have been really part and parcel of the efforts that MSE has put forward so far. I think it's a real feat. 47 academics that are of diverse backgrounds, of diverse disciplines, and it really shows the diversity of contemporary Muslim scientists in Europe. And I just wanted to begin my few words of remark with just congratulating you guys, because I think this is something that's really needed and it's missing. And one of the reasons why, which is something I wanted to touch up on, why we have a lot of Muslim scientists, but not necessarily are they visible, I think is a lot to do with the larger societal issues that we deal with as Muslims, which is that on one hand, we are considered to be, the other, the sort of devil in disguise, so to speak, by many European public officials, public policy, and Muslims are scapegoated for many of the ills that this continent is dealing with in order to blindside the larger population from the real issues that their government should be dealing with. So that's one thing. And the other side is I think something that's probably unique to the academic model, which is that the focus is on merit. It's not so much, there's very less attention given to the diversity that your lived experience brings, right? So everything is about maintaining that standard of merit, of rigor. And so those are the tools that you showcase, and that informs your academic progress and how the academic community perceives you. So that then internalizes academic Muslims to not necessarily put their Muslim foot forward, if that makes any sense. And so I think that too also speaks to the reason why we might not be as visible as we should be. And then on top of that, there seems to be, you guys have remarked on this, there's this really persistent history that seems to be clouding over us, which is that, the golden era of Muslim achievement is over, done and dusted, and that's no longer the case. And so we should move on from thinking that Muslims can rise to the occasion again. And there's a lot wrong with that perception. Muslims across the world, not just in Europe, are doing remarkable work, whether it's scientific or in other spaces of our society. And the fact that we're not showcasing that, and that we're not, showing that in a way that's very visible, I think is a lack. I think it does a disservice to our society. So I think MSE does a lot in combating that and in bringing that forward. One of the sort of things I wanted to touch up on is the disparity between the different European communities. If you look at Muslim scientists in other parts of Europe, particularly in places like France, in Eastern Europe, to a lesser extent maybe in Northern Europe, there may be a bit more of colonial guilt going on in the UK, where we see more Muslims actually being in academia. But I think it's important that we try to connect those dots. So the fact that there's a historical presence of Muslim science being old school, the fact that we have a pushback from the larger society and policymakers in particular that are drumming down on everything positive about the Muslim identity. And then on the more academic level, the fact that there's more focus on the merit and less so on what your lived experience brings to the table. So if we can connect those three dots, I think we have a good sort of foundation to kick off from.
Thank you, Idil. Thank you. So, devil in the sky. We need to normalize these devils, somehow disguised in the places where they're already present there. Our second speaker is Professor Masoud Kamali. Currently, he's the scientific leader of the research and consulting organization In Care Sweden AB. He was a professor of social work at Mid-Sweden University, where he established the only global and educational program of social work with an anti-racism profile. This theoretical framework and practice have had a seminal influence on the education and training of social workers in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. The author of over 60 books, Professor Kamali was appointed by the Swedish government as the national leader of the governmental inquiry into power, integration, and structural discrimination between 2004 to 2006. The results and suggestions from the inquiry have led to many anti-oppressive changes in Swedish social policy and the educational system. Professor Kamali, it's an absolute honor to have you with us here today. Welcome to MSE. The floor is yours.
Unmute. Thank you very much, Ayla, and thank you everybody for inviting me to share with you some of my ideas about, being Muslim or being considered to be Muslim in Europe and start your career here. I just give you a short background. I came to Sweden 1989, and since then I have been I had a degree from Iran. They did not accept it, and still I sent my degrees to evaluation for the Center of Evaluation in Sweden. I'm still waiting for the answers. I sent it 1990. So I started everything from the scratch. When I was put as the head of the governmental inquiry in Sweden, 76 professors in this country wrote a letter to the government that you know what you are doing. You are reducing the quality of the high qualitative Swedish governmental inquiries, which has been in effect in Sweden since 17th century. So now for the first time, you put a Muslim and as the head of the governmental inquiry, which is going to give you some suggestions for new laws and so on. The interesting is that they wrote that when you know that Masoud Kamali has his education from Iran, we know that in Muslim countries, in Iran, the education quality is very low. The problem was that these 76 professors did not check that my education from Iran is still in the Center for Evaluation. And I did all my education in Sweden. So I answered just in the major journal that if you are questioning my quality, so I'm questioning yours, because you have also your professor and all degrees from Swedish universities. So I had from 3 very major Swedish universities, Stockholm, Uppsala, Linköping. So that's just a short, but what I received as emails and everything from other, racist and also xenophobic and even well-established groups in Sweden when I was the head of this inquiry, 2004, 2006, it's something else, but I don't want to talk about that. When I was a student, or a PhD student in Uppsala, Department of Sociology, I came across a book of Bernard Lewis called The Muslim Discovery of Europe. Really, I just make the sense of that. What the Muslim discovery of Europe? You had Ottoman Empire as a European empire for many, many years. You had the Arabic Empire, Muslim discovery of Europe. Then I was interested to look at the concept of Europe. What's the concept of Europe? So I had a European project from 2001 to 2008 called the European Dilemma, which was about the problem of Europe to, first of all, define itself in confrontation to other non-Europeans, or the concept of West and the rest. And we know that the rest you can see is Muslims and Blacks, and of course, Africans. And if you are Muslim and African, you are much more otherized and the other side of European project. So, and then the clash of civilization, we don't need to talk about that. But I mean, the whole discussion of to be European, but not white, blue-eyed, and blonde, and Christian. So the problem is, who is European, who is not? And where is Europe? I remember that we had several courses on where is the borders of Europe really? And it's, of course, connected to West, the concept of West. Sometimes West was Iran, Persian Empire, we know historically. West was Ottoman Empire, and West was, then later on, West became Europe or Western Europe. And now today it's something started in southern Cyprus up to Haparanda in Sweden. It's called West. And what that it means, I don't know. It has nothing common in nothing, but at least they have a concept of European and be European. I'm working right now, just say that I wrote many articles and books about just the concept of Europe and how modernization became a part of European concept and the concept of Europe. So I remember that many of my colleagues said, oh, you know, we also are modern. We also are European. We also are modern. I said, what is modern? What's to be modern? I mean, modernization born by war, killing, slavery, mass killing. What's modern? What's to be modern? What is so interesting to be modern and be European? And modernization, we know what happened. I mean, the concept of Auschwitz as the top of the modernity, rationalization of human being and so on. So the history of Europe is very problematic, but to try to be European is much more problematic. To have a concept of Europe as a socioeconomic, cultural, and religious entity that, for instance, some of European Union's members like Poland and the others have, it's a problem. So just to finish as an introduction, say when I had this European project in Uppsala University, I was then at the Department of Multi-Ethnic Studies, European in Uppsala. One day I got a call from the security service in the university, the head of the security service. He wanted to meet me. I said, yes, of course. And he came to my room and said, Masoud, I have just a question. I was invited together with all security the chief of security services in all European university countries who have been members at that time of the European Union. We had a question that they asked us about Muslims are taking our European universities. What do you think about that? I said, listen, it's the wrong question rising to me. I mean, look at me, I'm professor, I have a Muslim background. So sorry, I can't just say, no, that's not true. But I think this is a stupid question, but you see, real question that they are discussing in the European Union. Muslims are taking our European universities. So I think that's very interesting to talk about that, but just to finish, say that in my opinion, the Crusades never ended. It's going on in modern wars, modern conflicts, but I will talk about that later, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Kamali. I'm going to introduce the next speaker. The third speaker is Dr. Hani Abdul Kadir. She's a promising young medicinal chemist with a PhD from Karolinska Institute in Sweden. She's currently a scientific advisor and consultant for pharma advisors in Stockholm. Her research focus is on epigenetic factors in hematological malignancies. I won't pretend that I first thing about any of those things, but it sounded really awesome. Hani, please take the floor.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And thank you so much, the committee or the organizers for this event, and also for organizing the fantastic platform, Muslim Scientists Europe. I had the pleasure to be among one of the first scientists that was showcased, and I think it's a fantastic platform to showcase so many brilliant and prominent researchers across the world, actually, which usually we don't get the chance to network or see all these different people in different fields. So I think it's a great initiative from you guys. So Jazakallah khair for that part. And regarding this event, Ali, you asked me about my interpretation regarding the words Muslim, scientists, and European. So when I was reflecting upon these three words, I thought they all seem to have one dot that is connecting them. So for me, that dot is Islam. And if you break it down to different parts, I think the first part to focus on with regards to Muslim. As Muslims, we are obliged to submit to the truth and also to seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. So from that part, I think it's a really, as you mentioned, to showcase all these different types of scientists in different parts of the world, really emphasizes that Muslims are on top of the education and both the academic criteria and academic aspects. But I think it also showcases that in our religion, it's a fundamental part to actually seek knowledge, no matter where it is. So I think that's the link to Muslim. And when you look at the aspect of scientists, I think in Islam and in the Quran and in the Hadiths, there are so many parts that that the modern science has recently showed to be confirmed, if you can say so. And these things are things that were revealed to us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there are so many points in the Quran, so many verses, and in the Hadith. I cannot mention all of them now, but for example, the intermittent fasting that was recently shown to have beneficial effects on the physiological aspect. And that is only one part of an iceberg of so many aspects from the scientific point of view that has been recently shown to have really strong evidence, both in the modern science, and I think that's a really crucial aspect when you think about scientists and Muslims, that we are actually we have so much more in our religion that we didn't think of before. And I think for the outward, for the people that are not Muslims, I think this has been interesting for so many years. And I read about, there's one project that has been focusing on trying to see all the different inventions from the Islamic civilizations and how and if they are still available today. And this project is called 1001 Inventions from the Muslim Civilizations. And this brings me to the topic, the European part of the MSE. And that part, as you all mentioned, from my experience also, and from a natural science part, aspect, it seems that Islam and Europe are not compatible. But if you really look at it, Islam was actually the one, from an Islamic point of view, when Islam came to Europe, they didn't really have all these modern parts that they today claim to be European. Actually, many of them are from Islam. And as you all know, Islam spread all the way to Spain. So there are, until today, so many parts that they try to, they try to make it more or less like it's not from Islamic point of view, but it is actually so many aspects that have been revealed before and until today. So another point I wanted to address is, from my own experience, I feel like the past 8 to 10 years that the Muslims are trying to be villainized in so many aspects. And I think that's, it is really bad that's going on. And I think with Corona effect, I think it's even worse than before. You can only look at France, what's happening, but also in southern Sweden, there are so many aspects that are regarding discrimination and also regarding Islamophobia. So there are many things that are actually changing to the worse, and I'm beginning to think about it in a long term, because I have children and I really want them to have a strong Muslim identity, but I also want them to have a strong European identity, because this is where they grow up and this is where they are born. So I really hope for the future that things will get better. But as it is today, I think it's really, in some aspects, actually quite frightening what is going on in the world. And I'm not here to scare you all, but I think you all are aware of this evolution or what's going on in many European countries. I think, hopefully, I hope it gets better. And yeah, that's all from me.
Many thanks for the introduction, Hani. We are moving on to the next speaker, who is Dr. Nirha Efendić. She is a literary historian in the field of oral literature. She is currently the curator of the National Museum in Sarajevo, Department of Ethnology. Her work mainly focuses on lyric poetry, and currently she also does anthropological work. We are really pleased to welcome you here, Nirha. I know that you recently had COVID, so that you recovered, and it's good to see that you are well and you could join us. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much. Salam alaikum, first of all, and good evening to everybody. Thank you for having me tonight with you. And congrats for forming Muslim Society of Europe. I think this is a great idea to network all those people. And I hope that everybody will take advantage from that network. Firstly, I'm Bosnian and Muslim, and my thoughts and focus is actually here in Bosnia, before, firstly in Bosnia and after that in Europe. And as you know, Bosnia went through the horrible war, aggression, and you also know from the recent past of the dissolution of Yugoslavia, what we call now the Western Balkans. And all that Muslim in Europe are facing today, actually we faced in last 3 decades in the space that we are now called Western Balkans, that was the Yugoslavia. That means the prejudice toward Muslims. But the problem is much deeper that we can see now, and when we talk about that, we have to go back maybe 200 years ago and start with departure of Ottoman Imperium from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and coming Austro-Hungarians into the Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm also, as Adnan already said, the curator of National Museum. That was the institution that Austro-Hungarians formed in Bosnia and Herzegovina and started to collect objects and stories to present the future generation what was the process of Europeization of the terrain. that means what will be cultural changes in everyday life of the population on the terrain. So they formed the first ethnological department of ethnology, and that institution has 130 years long tradition. That means that the process of Europeization of Balkans Muslims started 130 years ago at least. And the whole problems that we went through actually culminated in 25 years ago with the genocide committed against the Muslim in Eastern Bosnia. I was born in Eastern Bosnia in Zvornik, and originally I'm from Srebrenica. In that genocide, I lost many members of my family, father, brother, and 33 other members of my family. And I can talk about that horrible experience. But the thing is changing step by step. Finally, Muslims in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Balkans, gain that statehood, which is very important, which is I think the most important things in a modern Europe. When Professor Masoud asked what is actually modernization is, I think that the main issue of modern Europe is forming nationalities. And our neighbors from the West and East, I mean Serbs and Croats, went to earlier than the Muslims, than the Bosniaks, and actually that slowed the developing of kako se kaže usporilo, slow down the development of Muslim nationality in Tito's Yugoslavia, but recognizing the Muslims in their political and subjectivity, let's say, was firstly in Tito's Yugoslavia in 1976, I think, in 70s. And that was the platform after the dissolution of Yugoslavia for the Muslims of Europe, of ex-Yugoslavia, to develop to gain back their nationality, Bosniak nationality, after the dissolution Yugoslavia, and established a firm nationality, which is very important in modern Europe. We went through a lot of problems, a lot of obstacles to obtain such a country. If you remember all those happenings during the late 90s, you can remember the suffering of the Muslim of the Balkans. Now I afraid how we can go forward with a lot of scarves and I don't know, with the Islamophobia all over the world, especially in Europe. I don't know, it is a big issue. What I can do now, I can, all that I can is collect all those oral stories, what I'm actually doing. I'm in charge for all collection of oral stories, oral songs, talking about past, and collect and share them from our past to the new, younger generation for possible better future. I don't know. And that's all from me for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Our fifth distinguished speaker is Tariq Modood, a professor of sociology at the University of Bristol, UK. He has held over 40 grants and consultancies, has over 35 co-authored and co-edited books and reports, and over 250 articles and chapters in political philosophy, sociology, and public history. He was made a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and was awarded an Order of the British Empire Award for his services to social sciences and ethnic relations in 2001. It's our pleasure and honor to have you with us here today. Welcome. The floor is yours, Professor Modood.
Thank you, Alia. And like the others, I'd like to congratulate you in setting up the Muslim Scientists in Europe project, this platform, for bringing us together, not just tonight, but in a more systematic way over time. And thank you for inviting me to join this panel this evening. So as I understand it, the invitation is to say in a few words, at least in a few minutes, what do I think my contribution is or has been to the general theme of Muslims in Europe. So I'll do that, and I'll do that by saying, referring to three concepts. So the first one is to do with racial equality and anti-racism, because that's actually where my work started, at least in this field. I was doing something else entirely differently prior to that. And working in racial equality, initially actually not as a scientist, but as a policy practitioner, as an administrator, I emphasized against some of my colleagues and other activists that equality required people to be able to define themselves. So a lot of my colleagues and, as I say, activists in this movement, especially in Britain, said, look, we are all Black. That's how racists think of us. So that's our primary identity in Britain. That's our social location. And I said, no, that's not good enough. Anti-racism is about challenging the identities that are imposed on us, the distorted identities that suppress and oppress who we are. And so the first step of racial equality must be to allow people who've been racialized, people who are oppressed, to define themselves. And this can mean lots of different things, but one of the things it clearly can mean is that a community that's defined by race and color or national origins, like Pakistani, may resist that by saying, no, actually, we are Muslims, or we are Sikhs, or whatever the case may be. So that was one of the first things I did, by arguing for the importance of self-identity as part of resistance to racism. The next move I made within this general first field of racial equality was that I argued that racism is not just about color, certainly not in contemporary Western Europe. And I began this argument in the late 1980s, when it was becoming quite clear to me that many of the academics, especially again in Britain, because we were so influenced by the American paradigm, thought everything in terms of black and white. But actually what was happening in Britain, France, Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and so on, was not that everything was being seen in black and white, but rather that certain kinds of what we might call phenotypical or appearance-based, if you like, color-based racisms were being compounded by a racialization of community attributes or community identities, like Asian in Britain, like Maghrebian in France, or it could be Turkish, or it could be Muslim, because that too was an identity or a set of overlapping identities that was being racialized. And so I developed the concept of cultural racism, and then later, I was one of the first people to start talking about Islamophobia as a form of racism, as a form of cultural racism. And maybe we'll have more to say about that later. So that was the first concept. The second one is to do with multicultural equal citizenship. So a lot of my political arguments, my normative arguments, are grounded in issues of equal citizenship. Now, standardly, and it's certainly in liberal citizenship, equality is understood as the sameness of treatment. Equal people are people who enjoy the same rights and are treated the same, no one favorably, no one less favorably. And I argued that that was an important concept, sure, no denying that, but that wasn't enough. And this is the significant multiculturalist contribution to the concept of equality. It is that in a context where people's identity and people's difference matters, that sameness of treatment can actually be a denial of equality in certain contexts or interpreted in a certain way. And therefore, equality as sameness had to be qualified with equality as respect for difference. And one implication of this was that equality included reference to group identities and not just to individuals, as the liberal concept does. And difference here has two aspects. Firstly, there is the negative difference where people tell you, you are different or you are problematic. There's something wrong with you. You're inferior or backward and so on. And we've obviously had some reference to that so far this evening. And that relates quite closely to my understanding of racialization and cultural racism. So that's one aspect of difference. But the other aspect is people's own sense of who they are. And you'll see that this relates to my first argument about racial equality when I said self-definition is the first step of racial equality. People being allowed to be who they are in public spaces, in shared public spaces, in civic spaces, in institutional frameworks, and for that matter, sometimes in law, and so on. And so that idea of positive identity, people's sense of who they are, like being Muslim, for instance, but not only, being Black, or it could be being British Asian, could be a number of things, could be being European, that this positive identity should also be part of multicultural inclusion, not just anti-discrimination, but a positive identity inclusion. And that relates to our sense of belonging, not just belonging to a minority group, like being Black or Asian or Chinese or Muslim, but also our sense of belonging to the wider citizenry, our sense of membership of our polity, like Britain or Germany or Sweden. And so in a way, I would say that what I've been doing under this second concept of multicultural citizenship is that I've been using the central pillar concepts of equality, which, you know, if we remember the French Revolution triad, liberté, égalité, fraternité, I've been, much to the horror of Republicans, I've been multiculturalizing them. I've been saying, well, what does it mean to have liberty, to have equality, to have fraternity or solidarity in a context of diversity and difference? And that's what multiculturalism is. It's not relativism, it's not anti-universalism, it is grounded in citizenship, but it multiculturalizes citizenship. And finally, my third kind of contribution is the concept of moderate secularism. Because what happened in both in academic and in political arguments in Britain that I was engaged in, that I was, engaged in advocacy, and people said, oh yeah, okay, so we can make explicit, in the public space, we can acknowledge gender. We don't have to talk about abstract individuals. We can talk about men and women. We can talk about Black, Asian, and white. We can talk about heterosexuals and gay. But we can't talk about religious people in the public space because we are a secular society, we're a secular country, and our citizenship involves a kind of blindness to religious difference. So we can be anti-color blind, anti-gender blind, anti-sexuality blind, but at the same time, we insist on being religion blind. And I thought actually that in itself was a form of oppression. That to exceptionalize religion when all other identities that we were working to rethink them and include them in the public space, to stop their privatization as historically has been done, both in liberal theory and in liberal practice, but to carry on wanting to privatize religious identities. So Muslims must be invisible in the public space, including in political parties and workplaces and universities and governments and so on. I said, no, if we're going to have multicultural identity inclusion, religion must not be exceptionalized. Moreover, and this is what the moderate secularism refers to, I said, instead of talking abstractly about secularism, let us actually look at the societies and the polities we live in, like England and Germany and Sweden. What we don't have here is the separation of religion and the state. That's an abstract concept, which may or may not be desirable. I personally think it's undesirable, but I'll leave that aside. But even if it was desirable, that's not what we have. In England, in Britain, our head of state, the monarch, is the supreme governor of the Church of England, which is an established church with bishops in the House of Lords. One of the biggest expenditures, fiscal expenditures, is the money that the state gives to religious organizations, primarily just Christians, then Christians and Jews, and now Christians, Jews, and some others, including Muslims, to run schools funded by the state, but run by religious organizations, church-like organizations, Muslim organizations, and so on. And this is not unique to England or Britain. It's true in Belgium, it's true in the Netherlands, it's true in Germany. It is basically the model of the Nordic countries, though you have some variations amongst them. And to some extent, it's even true in laïcité France, where Catholic schools enjoy an enormous amount of state funding, and 20% of all school children, all pupils, are taught in Catholic schools funded by the French state. This is, the heart of Republican laïcité. So I said, let's work with the world that we live in rather than the abstract concepts of political theorists, which are out of touch with our world, and let us work to multiculturalize our moderate secularism. And so this is something I've been pursuing over the last decade or so, both in terms of theorizing, but also in terms of practical multiculturalist politics. Because if we are to have multicultural equality, we have to extend it to religious organizations and religious communities, and we have to encourage religious groups to work together in the same way that we encourage people across race and ethnicity and class divisions and so on to work together, which means that the state cannot be indifferent to the state of religious formations in the country. It must encourage cooperation and inclusion for religious people as much as anybody else. So those are the main kind of contributions I think I've been making over the last couple of decades. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Modood. We have reached the end of all the introductions. Thank you all so much for this wonderful kind of insights there. It's obvious now you all come from different fields. You come from different, well, in a sense, what Professor Modood was speaking about is, coming with different, from different lived experiences, different histories, not just different disciplines. And we cannot obviously divorce that from our science, from who we are as citizens, as we identify along all three of these identity markers: Muslim, scientist, and European. So I would like to open the floor to a discussion amongst yourselves. Feel free to ask questions, comment more on what others have said. Please, Professor Masoud, you can start.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for presentations. And I just wanted to relate to what the Professor Tariq said about multiculturalism. So to open up a discussion here. I think, yes, when I also started my career in Sweden in the early 90s, the concept of multiculturalism and discussion of the cultural difference and so on was very, as an agenda, about political and scientific agenda. I worked in a center called Multi-Ethnic Center in Uppsala. Now the center is away. And now it's just a center for Holocaust studies. So this attack of multiculturalism and the way that, or at least the right-wing parties and ideologies march to power in all European countries, really in all Western countries and globally. When Hani now mentioned the racism in Sweden and xenophobia and so on and anti-Muslimism, which I call it, is just on rise. We see that becoming more obvious since right-wing political parties or racist political parties groups change their strategies, and now they are in the political life of those countries. In Sweden we have SD, we have British National Party, we have Front National, and all those have something in common. They call themselves anti-jihadism, and that's really, it's anti-Muslimism. So I think that, of course, this Tariq says, I agree with everything that you said, Professor. The problem is now that we have a development on the contrary. We have a development which is very dangerous. I'm right now writing a book, interviewing 4 groups in Sweden, academics, journalists, politicians with immigrant backgrounds, and civil society activists. Something is going on which is very, very scary. It's not just Muslims, including Muslims. They are very much subjected to this racism, which is going on and becoming stronger. But also something is going on. Many say that they are doing self-censorship. They are not saying things that they otherwise would like to say because they are very afraid to lose their jobs, lose their positions in the universities. They have to use racist discourses, anti-Muslim discourses in journalism, because if they don't, they are losing their jobs.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, yes. Thank you, Professor Masoud. I'd like to respond to that. So I entirely agree with you that there are these scary right-wing nationalist developments across so many countries, perhaps every single one of our countries. And you say, well, what can we do about it? What should we do about it? I suppose I begin by first observing that if we look at opinion polls and political competition, meaning political party competition and actual electoral results, what we really find at the moment, if there is a right-wing movement, without a doubt, but we at the same time do find that our societies, certainly this is true of Britain, and we also know from recent news how true it is of the United States, that our societies are deeply divided. And they're deeply divided, not because everyone's attracted to those right-wing parties, but because some people are and some people are not. So we are divided basically almost, I would say, a third who are attracted to these right-wing parties, and I'll call them mono-nationalists, and a third who are very pro-diversity. And of course, that includes people like us, but not only us, our white friends and colleagues and political party members and trade unionists and neighbors and so on. And then there are a third of people in the middle who could be one by either side, and who in one election may tilt in one direction and in another election tilt in another direction. So the challenge for us, I would say, is not simply how to defeat the extreme right wing, the rising extreme right wing, but how to win the middle. Because if we can't win the middle, the right wing will win the middle. So that's the challenge for us. So I think the model of society, contemporary problematic we must begin with, is that of polarity. There is a deep polarity between pro-diversity and anti-diversity, and we have to find the politics, and insofar as we are intellectuals and scientists, the ideas to win over the middle and to heal the polarity, the divisions. And I have a contribution to make. So I think that one of the things that, again, this is more true of Britain perhaps than of some other countries. I wouldn't like to overgeneralize. But some people in Britain, including a lot of my friends and colleagues, have come to devalue a sense of national belonging. They think they're male or female, they're heterosexual or homosexual, they are Muslim or secular or atheist or whatever, but the national is not very important to them. In fact, not just not very important, they can be sometimes very anti-national. They can be strongly local, and sometimes they're strongly cosmopolitan. And they use these two geographical scales, the local and the cosmopolitan, or if you like, the local and the European, as a kind of pincer movement to devalue the people who have a strong sense of national identity. And I'm one of those people. I have a very strong sense of national identity. I have a sense of Muslim identity. And I have a sense of being of a professorial identity in the social sciences, et cetera, et cetera. So I think what we need to do is to develop a pro-diversity perspective which can not threaten, but bring into the pro-diversity camp those who have a sense of national identity and therefore can hear the siren voices of the right wing. And I call that combination multicultural nationalism. Perhaps we can call it something else. I'm not so worried about the term, but what I would want to emphasize that it puts an emphasis on national identity and the hard work of thinking about the place of the majority in a multicultural society, not just of minorities, but what is the rightful place of the majority, the Swedish majority, the British majority, et cetera, et cetera. Because, and one way to think about that is to ask ourselves a kind of the parallel question, what should be the place of the Muslim majority in, for example, Egypt or Pakistan? How should we normatively view the majority? That, I think, is a very fundamental question to solving the problem of why the right wing is becoming so popular.
Yes, Professor Kamali, please.
Well, thank you very much. What is happening? I agree with your division of those three groups now in many Western countries. I mean, you have right-wing extremist racist groups, of course. They are on Front March. We see them everywhere. They are not as, I mean, we see also many of them really participating in political decision makings in those countries, but also a group who are multiculturalist or for diversity. I made a research of 8 European countries from 2002 2001 to 2008. The result is published in a book called Racial Discrimination, Institutional Patterns and Politics. In those 8 countries, including UK, Liverpool University was engaged. So what we saw was not the danger from the right-wing parties, but the adaptation of the right-wing parties' ideology and programs by mainstream parties. That is what happened in Sweden. That's what happened in France. That's, I think, happened in various European countries and Western countries. We see now Social Democratic Party in Sweden, which was a solidaric party, multiculturalist party, is very much a party adopting the SD, Sweden Democrats or racist parties ideology, anti-Muslim ideology. We see that everywhere. Today you are talking, I mean, we know, I'm convinced that you know about the Trumpism, the ideology of Trumpism, what's happening now in those countries. So the problem is that we have mainstream parties that are not in support of multiculturalism. But at the same time, saying that, I think that something is, call it hopeful, a hopeful development. I mean, in Black Lives Matter movements in the United States, we saw a silent majority or a silent group of young, white, blacks, and I mean, diverse peoples claiming change. That's my hope. That's my hope, just to say that. But at the same time, I think I have no hope in mainstream parties. I think what's happening today is an adaptation of racism, anti-Muslimism, anti-multiculturalism, which is called now by Henry Giraud and the others as Trumpism, which is just going on. In Sweden, at least, that I am living, and I have contacted many other people in other countries, I think the development is not reversed. The development is going on wrong direction. I agree with you that we have to win the majority or the between people or the third group. But I don't know how. My hope is on social movement, not on established political parties or mainstream political parties. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I was thinking just to kind of continue on that thought and ask if you think that, for instance, I was thinking of Nirha and her unique kind of, the history of the Bosnia. She spoke about Bosnian nationality, and 35 years now after the war, she mentioned genocide, all those things that happened, the Bosnian identity before, during, after, and so on, and it's still being kind of questioned, which for me was kind of interesting, a connection to what Professor Modood was speaking about, this denial of that I can identify, have a nationality, and I can use that. So I was thinking, like, do you feel that Bosnians have perhaps something to come with to the discussion, to bring something to the discussion in terms of nationality and multiculturalism, because a lot of the right wing, for instance in Sweden and other places, they look at us, the Bosnians and the Yugoslavia as the failed multiculturalism. They use us as an example of don't do that. It's not good. But how can we actually look at that and use it somehow to reinvigorate this or to bring something new to the discourse? If you can say something about that.
Thank you, Adnan. Yes, we were fighting for that diverse. During all those years, more than 25 years, even after the war, and but I think the general trend is to turn to the right. even after forming a country, actually, yes, we still have, we like to say that we have multicultural country like it was before, like it was during the Ottoman Imperium, it was in Austro-Hungarian Imperium, in Tito's Yugoslavia, in old Yugoslavia also. Bosnia had, and nowadays has, a diverse society. And that was our option for survival. I mean, Muslim inside their own nationality, Bosniaks. That was the only option, to have a country with all that, with diversity of the national, that diverse, multicultural country. And that's the only option for Europe also, because you know, you have so many countries, so many societies, so many cultures, nationalities. It's not centralized like America, like other, you know, bigger countries. And but inside of that, we can see still the fact that like a general trend, turning from the center to the right, even among the Muslims, among the Bosniaks parties, from the center to the right. I don't know why. It is completely wrong. I mean, wrong in a sense for you know, to keep stable countries, to avoid the potential war. A part of that, for every aspect of life, is better to keep that multiculturalism and that diversity in, if you want, in economical sense, in any other sense of life. But I hope that that is just a trend that will end, that some clever head will turn the back into the right side. I mean, like the professor Modood said, yes, let's support the center. I mean, that could be an option. That could be an option. Am I right?
You know, one of the main problems that we're having, if I can just chip in here, is there's a war of words going on. There is a battle for the control of the public sphere narrative. And one of the things that the far right has done much better, I think, than the left or even the centrists, is to occupy that space and to understand the virality of narrative politics, right? I remember here when we were going through the Brexit referendum, you know, those that were campaigning for Remain came out with the economics. They came out with the statistics and how much, you know, value there is to staying in the EU, and how much, you know, we benefit materially from being a member of the EU. None of that resonated with people. People wanted to have their emotions engaged and their narratives engaged. And that's what the far right did. The Brexit campaign came out and gave it to them in emotional terms. And that's what resonated with them. Never mind if it's going to be at their own destruction. You know, I did my PhD at Cardiff in Wales, and there's another big city right next to it called Swansea. Swansea has one of the biggest EU-funded regeneration projects, and that's a city that went overwhelmingly for Brexit. You know, it's like a suicide mission. And, you know, if you look at it from logical terms, it's a suicide mission. But when you speak to the people on a one-to-one basis, you can see what resonated with them. And I think that is something that we, either if we are on the left politically or in the centrist, it's that world, the capturing of the world of narrative that we have yet to give due diligence to, that we have yet to give a due attention and effort, collective effort channeled towards it for. So until we kind of reposition ourselves to think about how can we win, if for the lack of a better word, the hearts and minds of people through communicating politics in a way that emotionally engages them. I think we're at a losing battle if we continue the discussion about, the benefits of economically doing this, and how much having a multicultural society is of benefit to us. You bring, having a diversity in your workforce, in your company, in our institutions. We know, we've seen the economic statistics over and over again, the benefits that you can reap from being in a multicultural, diverse setting, whether it's in your local society, community, or in your professional settings. But that's something that has not resonated, and that has not been, filtered through the narrative within our public sphere. So that's where I think the battle really is.
That was really, actually, that speaks to me so much. I really liked it because it kind of enters into my territory, which is storytelling, partly. And I always felt like being in the group of the MSE, but also generally when we discuss, we have had people who say, well, I'm not a scientist, or I am a scientist, or who is a scientist. And I usually was the one who always felt like the least scientist in the group, being a writer, a literary scholar, a little closer to what Nirha is doing, So, but this power of storytelling and this movement away from the single story to the multiplicity of stories as a way of tapping into those the potential, the resources that we all have. What Professor Modood was saying earlier, like a way to be a citizen is to engage through your entire being, all the aspects of who you are, how you're educated, all those things. And for me, that happens through a lot through storytelling, how we tell our stories and create that narrative. So this spoke a lot to me, and I'm sure to what Nirha was speaking earlier about, this tradition of the oral storytelling, not just the written, but also how we speak orally to each other, and now, especially because there's so much online. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I observed that, quite early on, like, back in 2016, 2015, when this whole campaign was going on, I was looking at both campaigns, and, I'm a media scholar, so I was looking at this through their media campaigning and the communication material that they were putting out. And then, I was visiting my local cafes and just sort of listening in on what people were talking about. And I could see that disparity, between the disconnect of the Brexit campaign and the Remain campaign and the everyday person, right? My hometown is Leicester. I'm also based in Leicester right now at the University of Leicester here. And again, this is a city that's considered to be ethnic majority. It's one of those cities that celebrates their diversity and the fact that we are one as a community. But really, there are these pockets, the enclaves of communities, of ethnic communities. That's really what the city is. It's a kind of a patchwork of different communities that live in segregated areas, and they don't really interact. So there's not much value that's being reaped from the diversity that exists. But if you go to spaces like, the neighborhoods that went for Brexit, and again, it was a very close tie, which was something that was surprising to many. But I was seeing the trend coming out. I mean, this was a city that went, I think, 55% was Remain and 45% said leave. So, we tend to gloss over that and not pay much attention to the sort of losing side. But 45% of a city that's just 500,000, that's a big margin. How are 45% of the population saying we want to leave in a city that is extremely multicultural, right? So that again shows the failure of the narrative. How was the benefit of having a multicultural, diverse society, part of Europe, sold as a story? That's where I think the failure is. And this is Leicester City is just I think a microcosm of what's happening at the larger macro scale across Europe. There's a reason why the mainstream parties are co-opting right-wing ideologies into their mainstream politics and policies, because they're seeing that it lands, right? So the Sweden Democrats' policies are filtering their way into the mainstream centrist social democrat politics and politicians, and even here the Conservatives have been able to gain a majority platform to govern from, because they basically took the Brexit party apart and filtered their ideologies into the Tory manifesto, into the Conservative manifesto. And so they were able to get all of the sort of Brexit supporters into their mainstream arena. So I think, these are the areas that we really need to start thinking about. How do we meaningfully communicate the benefits of having a diverse society through storytelling, through narrative politics? And I think that's where Adnan's job is going to be really tough next.
Thank you so much for that. Nirha was next, I think. Yes, please. And yes.
Yes, I just wanted to say that a lot can be done in cultural sense. I know that there is a non-governmental organization in UK called Remembering Srebrenica, which is leading by Vakar Azmi. And I know one of their practices were to visit each month Srebrenica and bring students and some also of very influential people in politics, in cultural life, I don't know, to see at the terrain what was done, and to share the lessons from Srebrenica, to stop spreading the hatred among the others in UK society. And they did a lot of job. They placed a lot of exhibitions, a lot of public events, sharing the lessons, what actually a hatred is capable to do if it's not stopped at the actually at the right time. Yeah. So the power of culture is can be huge.
Thank you, Nirha. Thank you so much. Next was Professor Kamali, and then I'm going to have some questions from the audience. We've been getting quite a lot of response actually in the chat and in this, so I would like to forward some of those. Please, Professor.
I was just, I wanted to raise maybe a most uncomfortable question to Idil, for instance, and also maybe to Tariq to discuss. And it's about the question of power. I mean, you are talking about, in my ears, what I hear is that the power of culture, as Nirha say, or Idil talks about the communication and so on, that we know in communication studies, the question of power, control of mass media, control of even internet and so on, and the several existence of a colonial discourse, which is everywhere. I mean, we did this Swedish one, which is very, very solidaric in the governmental inquiry on school books. The stories about Muslims attacking Europe, about Europe and Muslims, for instance, just look at that. These discourses are existing, and who are controlling the distribution of those discourses? So the question of power maybe just disappears a bit here. I think it's important to see what is going on. What is the development? I mean, as you say about the Brexit, we know that in UK, I don't know, I have not been living there, I've been there, but not living there, about the discussion, and here in Sweden, we had the same, when you have the Western Europe, this real Europe, and then suddenly you have the European Union taking in Bulgaria, taking in Romania, and so on. So you have the Europe is losing its virginity. So the old the old colonial conservative power, so try to take you away. Oh no, I don't want to be any more part of that. Of course, we know that, but at the same time, they have control of the media. We know it's the cultural battlefield is going on, but the question of power, I think, maybe it's important to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to respond to this?
Yeah, absolutely. Professor Masoud said that so eloquently. I don't think power is ever removed from the equation when we're talking about discussions that are relevant to the public at large. So whether we're talking about politics or whether we're talking about racism, institutionalized racism, power is never far away. So it's about where do we exercise power? Where do we find power from? And within, communication spaces, people often signal towards social media and the internet and how it is this, diffusion of power because everyone has access to the internet. And, when you start to unpack that thread, you really also start to see the inequality that lies within the internet, the affordances, the inequality of access, the inequality of good quality access, and then if you do end up having good quality access, it's about having digital literacy and understanding the space within which you are engaging, even if it gives you access to have something to say within the public sphere. So power is never removed far from the equation. But I think there's some hope within what we've been seeing happening over the last couple of years, particularly with the Black Lives Movement, but also, preceding movements that have taken to the streets, like the environmental movement. I mean, right here, we've got Extinction Rebellion. You guys are fortunate to have that young lady who speaks so eloquently and has the balls to address Trump and tell him he needs anger management. Right? So I think these are kind of the tidbits of challenges to power, the pockets of power that are now becoming mainstreamified, right? So for me, like you, I lean towards empowering those powers on movements on the margins, right? But I don't think that you have to take your eyes off the ball when it comes to central politics. So the traditional way of voting, of campaigning, of being part of politically organized, established politics also needs to be participated in, because the fight is coming from different directions, right? I mean, on the margins, you're fighting with groups like 8chan, and you have all of these sort of underground groups of internet groups that are propagating things like the superiority of man, superiority of the white man, and all of these discourses are happening in these margins, but at they're filtering through established people that then end up having a podcast that have 1 million people listening to them. So it's the fight is never on one side. I think that if we are able to diversify our efforts and our campaigning, I think that's where we gain power from, and we're able to engage resistant power with mobilizing power, if that makes sense.
Yes, Professor Modood, if you would like to respond.
Yes, I'll respond briefly as well. Well, I very much agree with what Idil said just now about it's not an either or to say, oh, all my hope lies in social movements, which basically is a very pessimistic comment, because you're saying all my hope lies in a margin which may or may not succeed for, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years' time. So yes, it is very exciting and empowering and transforming when a social movement takes off so quickly in the way that we've seen Black Lives Matter this year, just in a few months. It's certainly galvanized a lot of people in a number of countries, including this one. And I agree with the remark that you made, Masoud, about one of the optimistic features of those demonstrations was not just that it was reviving an anti-racism that seemed to have become a bit stale, but the fact that the movement was so multi-ethnic and multiracial. So that's a very positive sign. I also agree with Idil, what you said in your earlier comments about the importance of narrative. I entirely agree with that, and your illustration about the Brexit referendum. The only thing I would qualify that is not being a storyteller. I don't want to be totally edited out of the story. So I think before we can tell stories, we have to have a vision. And in order to have a vision that isn't vacuous, we have to have some coherent concepts. So that's me trying to write myself into this progressive story, give myself a job, make sure I'm not made redundant. So yes, we need to engage both with the mainstream and with the margins, because of what I said before about winning the what we might call the floating third. But I'll also say, I mean, all politics is about power, and you may say, well, we are on the weaker side, and that would be true as well. But you know, sometimes the people with less power can win, and unfortunately one of the examples is Brexit. The City of London, you know, one of the centers of financial capitalism in the world, certainly in Europe, they were all for staying in. The public, intellectuals, broadcasting, the media, current affairs, academics, we were all for staying in. The whole public sector, in terms of managers and so on, we were all for staying in. Even our media, which is infamous for having right-wing tabloid newspapers and so on, and they did, I mean, some of them clearly did campaign for the Leave side, but the majority of the newspapers, and especially when you take in, you know, the power of the BBC and so on. So we actually had a revolt against the establishment, because in terms of the power that you're referring to, that power was for Remain, but Leave won. So again, out of despair is a gleam of optimism, namely, don't be defeatist. The people who are winning today may not always be winning just because they're powerful today. If you get the right concept, get the right narrative, but also you do need to appeal to other people by giving them a dialogical role. You mustn't think of them as just ciphers, like, oh, we know everything, all we now need to do is to sell it to you, like as if it was an advertising campaign. We need to talk to them and say, what are your concerns? How can we address them? And that takes me back to a point that I made when I said, and very few multiculturalists, I think, have raised this so far, and it's not easy to raise, even I find it very difficult, I must admit, is what is the role of the majority, the cultural majority, the ethnic majority, the national majority? What is the role of the majority in multiculturalism? And one way, as I did indicate before, of kind of making it, if you like, less of a difficult question, making it a little bit easier, is to not just think about one's own country, but think about countries where you think there are favorable majorities. So if you think, oh, well, Muslim majority countries, what do we think the place of majorities and minorities should be in those places where we think the group that we identify with, or one of the groups we identify with, is in a majority?
Yeah. I mean, I completely, that resonates with me, Professor Tariq, because you know, just to share a personal story, I used to work for the Leicester Mercury newspaper here, and my editor, his mother, so we had a close working relationship, and you know, sometimes we'd visit each other's homes, and there'll be, you know, dinner that will be provided, particularly by his mother. She was very big on feeding everyone, despite the fact that there are professional boundaries sometimes, but she was very lovely. Now, one of the things that she had talked about was how there was too much diversity going on in Leicester. And I remember that, I mean, that was a good 10, 15 years ago, but I remember that as clear as day. She said there's too much diversity going on in Leicester. And the reason for it is because we've opened the floodgates, her words, not mine, the floodgates of Europe after we've let the Romanians and the Bulgarians and the Polish and so on into our borders. And I fear for my country. I fear that. And so her son asked her, my editor, what do you fear about? What is it that you're scared of? And she said, I'm scared that the social fabric of our nation is going to change. People are going to start mixing. People are going to start having partnerships and children. And before you know it, Britain is not going to look like what I know of it to look like, right? So he engaged with her at her level. And this is why I'm saying what you said really resonates with me. So it's not about having your own vision and understanding, you know, what we need to be selling and then bringing it to the doors of people. It's about engaging with their fears. It's about engaging with their anxieties. What is it that troubles them, that makes them do something like vote to leave the European Union, despite the fact that you know it is infinitely better for you on so many insurmountable reasons that, you know, for you to stay in rather than exit. And he gave her the example of her neighbor who is Polish. His name is Piotr. She calls him Peter. And Peter's very helpful to her because he helps her fix her boiler every time she has something that is wrong or that's, you know, giving her a bit of a quabble. She's a widow, right? She lives on her own. Her son's not always available. Peter's is the door that she knocks on. And her son used that as an example. And he said, oh, you know Peter, right? So Peter, what do you think about him? And she said, oh, he's lovely. He's amazing. He always comes and helps me. He always gives me a cup of tea, a helpful advice, and I can chat to him. You know, I don't feel as lonely. When I know that he's next door, I can just knock on his door. It's amazing to have him as a neighbor. And then he said to her, where is Peter from? Well, he's from Poland, but he's not like the rest. He's not the same, right? I mean, you know, I don't want to go too long into the story, but she explained the whole, you know, that macro discussion through the story of her neighbor, Piotr. And she could relate to that. And eventually she was able to nod her head and say, I suppose that makes sense, right? So that stayed with me. That story really stayed with me because it really is about not just convincing people of your argument or about your, you know, what's best for our country, but it's about addressing what is it that concerns them the most and then meeting them at their level. Right?
Yeah, thank you. Interesting discussion. So I'd like to turn all this discussion inwardly towards our Muslim communities. Since we have been talking about the importance of storytelling and the multiple narratives in our multicultural societies, how do you see the discourses of nostalgia? So my question is to Professor Tariq Masoud and Professor Masoud Kamali, and tying this with a question that we have got from Pakistan, that we need these discussions even within Muslim countries where forces of obscurantism holding regressive views are gaining momentum. So would you like to comment on that, please?
Yeah, we need this discussion everywhere. This question relates also to what Idil said and the others. I could just say that I hope that I could be as optimism as you are. I work with the EU in those corridors. I know that it's not just to be part of EU or not. Even those who are here are very strong racist groups in European Union, and they are just, being bigger and bigger and more influential. So it's not just a question that those who want to also remain in EU should be for diversity. It's not just exactly the same. But anyway, I would say that, yes, these discussions, I think that we have a question that this nostalgia back to origins and just of fundamentalist thinking about Islam and also other things. I think I developed a theory of multiple modernities. And I could say that in many Muslim countries, we had modernities, but not exactly the modernity that we have here, or in Sweden or in England. I believe that modernity, to use the concept of modernity as singular is wrong, is sociologically wrong. If you see on modernity in Nordic countries and compare that to England, just look at the social work in Nordic country. 96% of all social works is the responsibility of government and municipal authorities. In just UK, you have just, 20%, 50% that government is responsible. And you have the civil society, which more is strong in that, like in United States and others. Political system is not the same. You have all the concept of democracy, but we know in Sweden, we have not just the democracy. I mean, there's political democracy, also the economic democracy. It's a huge discussion of social democracy and so on and so on. Italy, I mean, you have not a democracy, concept of nation state in Italy doesn't exist. You have the Liga Nord, you have the northern part of Italy who want to be, is very rich, this fiat and compare with southern Italy. When we worked in the European project, one of our Italian friends said, in Italy, we have a saying says, we in the north, we work, those in Rome, they talk, and the others in southern Italy just get money and leave. So, and are criminals. So, I mean, the concept of nation states also is in discussions, and also the concept of Europe, the concept of many countries. Also in Muslim countries, where we are talking about, Pakistan, Iran, and the others, the nation states, all the nation states are in kind of crisis. Some of them using religion of the kind of that Hindus, Hindu nationalists now in India against Muslims and so on. We have that in other countries. We have in Israel, in Iran, everywhere. So those discussions we have to have. Which world we are going to have? How we are going to live together? And in which circumstances? How? Given this history of colonialism, given the history of imperialism, which is going on, militarism, the Western modernity and militarism goes hand in hand. You cannot separate that from each other. In Muslim countries, you had different kind of modernities. Iranian modernities is not the same as Ottoman Empire modernity and Turkey and the others. So we have to have a discussion on the multiplicity of political formations. Also, the role of religion and the relation between religion of Islam, of Christianity, and the Jewish religion and so on, and the political formations. And I think that we have to have the discussions. As Professor Tariq said about the concept of majority, is very important. Yes, of course. I think that we had a discussion in Sweden, what is democracy? They said the rule of majority is not. It's the protection of minorities. If it's the concept of democracy to be realized, it's not just the rule of majority. It should also be the protection of minorities, different kind of minorities, sexual minorities, religious minorities, and so on. We have to have the same discussion in our countries of origin. In Iran, in Egypt, in all those countries, what's the meaning to be Kurds in Turkey, to be Christian, to be Jews, and so on. This is a discussion which is, I think, the answer. If we cannot find a good answer to that, we have the problem of humanity in the world. We have a modernity of Europe and imperialism which shown they can burn people, they can kill. It was a question of burning Quran in Sweden. one Muslims went out and said of those imams and said, let them burn it. I mean, no problem. Just don't care about that. It disappears, because they want to have attention about it. One of my Jewish friends from the Jewish center in Gothenburg told me, no, you don't allow to burn the Quran, because we experienced when they burned our books, then they burned us. The symbolic of this is very important. Not just say that, let them do that. No, no, no. He said, no, you don't. I mean, the Jews supported, went against the burning of Quran. They said, we have this experience in Europe. We have been put in fire. So it's not just the Quran they are going to burn, but also the next step, they are burning us or forcing us to leave. I mean, in the whole, I think, both in Europe and in our other countries, Muslim countries, we have to have the discussions very much. What's the relation between majority, minority? What's a good, political polity in those countries? I think very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That really actually nailed a lot of the things that I've been thinking and that many have been voicing these. I remember, for these last 3 decades, I know a lot of people have been voicing those kinds of concerns and these things which appear to be merely kind of nothing or symbolic. There is much more to it than just as you said, the burning of a object, because it's not the burning of the object. It is an objection to something much larger. It's what that object represents and so on. So this is really very core of what is freedom and what it means. A number of questions we got actually in the chat were actually concerned with the question of freedom of expression in science. I wanted to go to Hani and ask you, because what we had today is this MSE, and one of the questions was, sometimes I feel like an M, sometimes like an S, sometimes like an E, sometimes I'm an MA, sometimes I'm an ME or SE, or it depends on the day and my own view of myself, but also how others view me. So Hani, you spoke about utilizing your own Muslimness in your working space, and one of the questions we had was, can you actually have a strong, say, a religious, national, political identity and be a professional? And how do you view that in your own work at Karolinska, which is a huge institute? It is a Swedish institute, but it's an international institute. So can you comment on that, please?
Sure. I was just typing to the one that asked the question.
Okay.
I think it's an excellent question to ask. And with regards to the identity, it is so crucial to have a strong identity, because once you feel comfortable and strong with who you are, others will eventually start to respect you. And if they don't, I think it's just their loss. For me, it's very important to have in my profession, but also in my everyday life. And that is what I'm trying to teach my children also, because I know they will grow up in hopefully not, but as the situation looks now, in a very tough society regarding to the Muslim identity. And I think that work starts from day one, because that's, especially when I looked in my own experience growing up in Sweden and in this field, I've always been like a minority in wherever I go. And for me, it was some time during my education that I felt like there are not that many Muslims in my field. I need to go. And so what I did was to go to engage myself in different organizations in order to see other people who look and behave like me. The principles of the Islamic identity. So that was one way for me to strengthen my identity. And And that led to being more secure and being more solid in who I am and what I want to do in life. So that is a really important question to ask, and especially as a profession, because that will guide you in your decision making in regards to profession, but also other aspects. And as you say, you cannot only be one version. You're, as you put it, like some days you're M, some days you're S, and so on. Of course, you have different parts from different from your life. I mean, you cannot only be one version regards to either the Muslim identity or your profession. So for me, you have to find something that connects the both and creates a holistic picture. And that's what with regards to science, for me, it's like I mean, you always look for knowledge and you always try to be the best version of yourself. And for me, that's a very, it fits with my Islamic identity also. It's nothing that you can take away. So that's how I see it. And of course, there will be people in the society that will always try to, especially in the natural science, I feel like many times the religion is taken away from the picture. It's like, no, religion is something else. Everything came from Big Bang and so on. So for me, it's the opposite. So I always find, what's it called? Yeah, security in my faith, and that leads me onwards to the next step in life. So that's my comment regarding that point.
Thank you so much. And I mean, the reason I kind of turned to you was not just because what you said in the beginning, but also I have followed your trajectory a little bit. You know, your biography. You're a young scholar, you're a young scientist, and really successful. And it felt to me that you exemplify what Professor Modood and others have said earlier, you know, that you utilized all the richness of who you are, you know, all those complexities, all those identities, everything that you are in, for instance, the field, the profession, private life, as a citizen, as a Swedish citizen, and just also being a really positive role model that I could, you know, single out for, let's say, my children or other people. I don't know anything about science, so when you speak science, I understand nothing, but I understand everything in terms of, you know, as you come across as a young scientist in this troubled time, and what image that gives us. I think that's, you know, so when someone says Muslim scientist, you know, I can see Hani Abdul Qadir, I can see Idil Osman, I see Nirha Efendić, I see Masoud Kamali, I see Tariq Modood, I even see myself, you know, so some on days when I consider myself to be the S as well. So not necessarily just, you know, some old image, hand-drawn, you know, white long beard and so on, but an image which I can relate to a lot more, an image which, you know, helps me get through the day and continue, gives me new energy. And
I can add a point to that.
Yes, please. Yes, please. I'm sorry.
It is, especially now, extremely important to actually showcase the diversity in our community that we have, and as Muslims, because this is something that normally is not showcased in a positive way. I mean, contrary, it's always the negative parts that usually draws the attention of media. So I think it's really thanks to you guys, but also other people that are doing similar work. I think it's very important. And as Idil was saying earlier regarding the, was it the neighbor or, yeah, the Polish guy. And this is important because most of the time, people who never encounter different people from either Muslims or different ethnicities, they always or mainly they get the idea from media, and usually if media is negative, then it is more important that we try to do our best to show the opposite, but also to interact more and to be more visible in our everyday life, and not only within our own communities. So I think that's an important part, and I'm trying to do that actively, or more or less involuntarily, because most of the time I'm the only one from my community in my profession. So yeah, I just wanted to add that, and thank you, Adnan and Ali and everyone behind MSE for this part.
Well, we are just honored that so many of you have sent us your material that allowed us to interview you, to feature you. This is all, the pleasure is all ours, really, and every single minute is well spent. We have approached the end of the panel. I know there's a lot of questions. This has been an amazing, vibrant discussion. I know we could go on for a couple of more hours, and I'm sure we will, especially if you come to Sweden for fika, and because then, the discussion never ends. Those who are in Sweden know that that's the obligatory thing. If you don't know what is fika, in a sense, you need to be re-educated. Yeah. And Tariq, I like to joke like this. So it's the Balkan humor. Thank you so much from me for this discussion, and I hope that, and you viewers, all of you who have participated in it, who have been watching us, I hope you gained a lot from this, but a lot of questions were answered, but also I think a lot of new questions have been asked, a lot of new avenues of thought have been opened. So from me, and also on behalf of the third member of MSE, Ramis Erlu, who is the real scientist in our group, the hard scientist, the one in the lab. So on his behalf, I also want to thank you. And Alia, please. Alia, would you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Really a pleasure to host you all. And since we have been sending around invitations, we have experienced truly the 50 shades of being a Muslim, not just Muslim visually, how a Muslim looks, beard, no beard, hijab, no hijab, hard scientist, social scientist, European, you're born or not born. So on this note, I would like to thank you all for being a guest. Thank you.